The problem with all this is we're trying to do forensics from outside the system. We don't have people inside saying, this is why they're hiding this is why they're hiding that, and even if we did, would we believe them? A lie is different at every level, and they have their set of lies that they're being told. So to really do this, you have to rely on the evidence itself. And then you have to rank that evidence in terms of the political realities of the entire culture in which you live, i.e. the United States, or the larger culture in which we live, which is the world.
I'm simply trying to point out to you that your seriousness is a dead-end road. Your worries are self-perpetuating. Now, the basis of all that, in fact, I'll give you a way to see it more clearly in yourself. If you think very soberly, honestly, candidly to yourself, just think, I'm going to ask you a question, you think about it for a few seconds and see if it isn't true. What trip are you running, even right now? Because we can talk about seriousness till the cows come home, but what does it really mean? It means you're always running a trip. You get out of bed, you start running a trip instantly. Wherever you go, you're running a trip, aren't you? If you think about it for a few seconds, aren't you running a trip? Every door you walk through, every room you walk into, every person you meet.
What else?
Running a trip just means you're taking a certain stance. You're trying to be a certain way or give a certain impression or get a certain result, and then that becomes a theme. You kind of have your little bag of trips that you're used to that are easy habits, and you can flip anytime, but it's not a big bag, Yeah.
Forget about it.
Every event, every episode in the book is as real as I'm able to make it. What I tried to do was to capture on paper how it felt when I was living each one of those experiences. And so every event in the book is as real as I can make it, is perfectly real. It started as an autobiography. I only changed the names of the people and places to protect the innocent. I changed the distances, the mileage distances a little bit as well to protect the innocent. And the last thing I did was some of the events in some of the later chapters took place before some of the events in the earlier chapters, but those are the only changes I made entirely to protect the names of the innocent. I was born in Brooklyn, Wisconsin on November 9th, 1944, and I was raised on a farm southeast of Madison at Fitchburg Corners. And then in the 5th grade, my family moved to a little town southeast of Madison named London, Wisconsin. It's in between Cambridge and Deerfield. And I graduated from high school at Cambridge High School. And I went to the University of Wisconsin for a year and a half. I come from a very poor family, and so I ran out of money. I was going to be drafted into the Army in the spring of '64, and so before I was drafted, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force on July 20th, 1964, did my basic training at San Antonio, Texas, at Lackland Air Force Base, which was 13 weeks. Then I did some time there in PATS, waiting for my security clearance. Then I was sent to weather training school at Chanute Air Force Base, Illinois. And from there I was, in March of 1965, I was sent to Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, and I served at Nellis and on the Indian Springs Gunnery Ranges until May 7th, 1967. On May 7th, 1967, I was sent to Vietnam, and I served in the Delta at Ben Tui, and I came back from Vietnam on the 8th of May, 1968. I was honorably discharged. And then I went back to the University of Wisconsin for a semester, ran out of money again, worked for a year, and then I met my wife, Marie, and we got married, and then we moved to Sacramento, California, and I got my Associate of Arts degree in physics from Sierra Junior College in January 1970, and then I attended San Diego State University at San Diego immediately following, and I got my bachelor's degree in physics and my master's degree in physics from California State University at San Diego in June of 1973. And then we went to the University of Maine at Orono for a year. I was in a PhD program. I thought I was going to be able to get my PhD in 2 years, but they wanted me to take 6 or 7 years, and I didn't want to. So I left the PhD program. We moved back to San Diego, and we lived there for 2.5 years. I worked at Sony Corporation in that time as a television engineer. Then I moved. My master's degree is in applied nuclear physics, and so I'm an expert in nuclear physics as well as in all forms of physics. If I'd done my thesis work in laser optics, I would have instead had a master's degree in laser optics. And so my physics education is very broad. Then I went, after working at Sony Corporation for 2.5 years, in 1977, I took a job with the Hanford Nuclear Reservation in southeastern Washington, and we moved there and lived for 10 years. I'm a computer expert. And I worked on nuclear computations, on nuclear radiation shielding, criticality analysis, and so on, working with plutonium and the other things. Then in 1985, I left that job and we moved here to San Diego, where I've been doing contract work on computers and databases and so on ever since. I got a master's degree in business administration from Nova Southeastern University in December of 1984. I worked on it while I was working at Hanford, so I now have 2 master's degrees, and I know all about statistics and everything you can do with computers and so on. And so now I'm a computer expert. While I was in the Air Force, they gave me lots of tests, and I rated perfect on the Air Force test for logical reasoning, for inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is like saying 2 plus 2 equals 4, and deductive reasoning is like saying 4 is the same as 2 plus 2. And I also got 1 wrong on the Air Force math ability test of 500 questions, which I was told was an Air Force record. And I also got a perfect score in math ability on the graduate record exam. And so I have a number of credentials in those areas. Many of my best friends, though, tell me that they're surprised that I do anything in science because they feel that I'm way better at my hobby, which is history, than I am at science and physics. I was stationed at Nellis, Air Force Base outside Las Vegas, and I served at Indian Springs on the gunnery ranges. Indian Springs is surrounded by quite a few bases. The Nevada test site, it's just up the valley is Area 51 and Dreamland and the other places. The gunnery ranges have many, many uses. One of the uses for the Indian Springs gunnery ranges was for pilots of fighter planes to practice bombing and strafing, to learn how to handle their airplanes in combat. And so as the weather observer at Indian Springs, when the ranges were in use, pilots would come for the fighter weapons training school at Nellis and drop practice bombs, practice strafing runs, practice skip bombing, and so on. When I was at Nellis, I was the weather observer. The weather observer assists the forecaster by making up weather charts and also takes weather reports and sends them out, transmits them. When I was at the gunnery ranges, I was the weather observer, and my duty was to get up at 3:30 in the morning, well, actually at 3 in the morning, and to get into uniform, and then to drive out onto the ranges, typically range 3, and then prepare a weather balloon, one that's called a pieball, and at 4:30 a.m. release the balloon. Then using a theodolite, which, as you know, is a surveyor's type instrument, to track the balloon and record the measurements for 10 or 12 minutes. It depended on the day. And then there were buildings out there. There was a weather shack. And then to take those readings and compute the winds. And then after doing that computation, to phone Nellis, there was a telephone out there, to phone the Nellis weather station and report those winds. Usually if you release the balloon at 4:30, you would have the weather report finished and ready to phone Nellis more or less by 5 o'clock. And then you could go in for breakfast, and then you'd come back out after breakfast, and you'd do it 3 or 4 more times, depending on the day and what Nellis wanted. You might do it, you typically did it again at 8 o'clock and at 9:30 or 10, 11:30. Then you could go in for the noon meal for lunch, and then you could come back out after lunch, and then you'd take the afternoon winds. And then when the school was, when you get towards the end of school, they ask you to fill out ask everyone to fill out a wish list. What bases would you like to be sent to? And I remember asking for March Air Force Base outside Los Angeles, and for a base in England and a base in Germany. And I remember handing it in, and I remember the sergeant saying, well, you know, you might as well fill out the form, but like he already knew where I was getting sent. And then when the orders came through, the order said, you're getting sent to Nellis. And, you know, I was told that at the time, the military had a list of what were good bases to be sent to and what were bad bases to be sent to. And the military said that being a weather observer at Nellis was supposed to be the most perfect job for an enlisted man in the U.S. military. But I remember when I got sent to Nellis, it just seemed like, it didn't seem like it had gone through the normal process. It just seemed like the base commander someone had talked to the base commander and said, send him to Nellis. So when I got at Nellis, as described in my book, in March of '65, it just seemed like it didn't seem accidental. I wasn't supposed to get sent to the gunnery ranges. At the time, I remember asking if I would get sent to the gunnery ranges, and my commander said, no, he did not want to send me to the gunnery ranges because after I had helped, as described in Book 1, land those F-105s that were trapped in the windstorm, he said I was so good at keeping my head about me that he wanted to keep me there in base, especially for emergencies and heavy weather. He said he didn't want to send anyone to the gunnery ranges until they had finished their on-the-job training, because to be a weather observer, you have the school training, then you have the on-the-job training. And I remember I wouldn't normally have been sent to the ranges as early as May of '65 because I was still in OJT. But I remember the major, as described in the book, in Book 1, the major one day was called over to the Nellis Base Commander's office. And when he came back, he was looking very serious and said, I will be the next one sent to the gunnery ranges, even though I hadn't finished my OJT training. And he said, well, you'll just have to finish it when you're at the base or whatever, and sign me off, you know. You could encounter the extraterrestrials anywhere in the ranges, anywhere in town, anywhere along the highway. You didn't have to go looking for them because all you had to do was to recognize what was happening when it happened. As a weather observer, usually I would drive out to Range 3 and take the daily runs. You always took the 4:30 run. Then during the morning and the afternoon, usually there were 4 or 5 more runs, and usually the last run of the day was 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon. Once in a while they would ask for special runs at 3, but it was quite rare. Usually the runs were taken from Range 3, but they could ask for runs from Range 1 as well, which was common. I would say probably 70% of the time you were doing it from Range 1. Now, as the weather observer, you're not part of anything. You're not part of a test team. You're not part of the ordinary chain of command. You're not a guy that's building anything. Your only job is to go out there and just be aware of everything, including the weather. And then, like if a storm started, you would phone Nellis. You were to take the weather, and you were supposed to know about everything. You had a theodolite. You were supposed to know the distances to everything. You had maps of everything. You could listen to a radio or write letters home or read books. But the idea was that if something happened regarding the weather, that an airplane pilot would care about, then you were supposed to phone Nellis and report it immediately. Usually the major problem a weather observer would, people would say, it's very lonely duty, so it's a great place for a hobby. But, you know, once you got the idea, you could listen to the radio and dance. You were out there by yourself at least 80% of the time. The only time there was ever anyone else out there with you is if the ranges were in use. The first time that I encountered them, they were in my barracks. You didn't have to go looking for them. They were quite happy to come looking for you. Yeah, you see, as a weather observer, I had to get up at I had my alarm clock set for 3 a.m. The regular guys didn't get up till 6 or 6:30. So that meant that I didn't want to bunk with the regular guys because I'd be waking them up every morning and that'd make them upset. So what I did at Indian Springs, there was a big double barracks that isn't there anymore, because in those days all the barracks were wood and they were World War II style barracks. And when you went in the main gate, it laid parallel to the flight line, and I was the only one in that barracks. It had the latrines in the middle, and it had the barracks on both ends, and I was the only one in there. Well, as described in Book 3, in the course of my life, I've come across two kinds of aliens. The ones at Indian Springs are tall and white. I call them the tall whites. Throughout most of their adult life, they are approximately the same height that I am. I'm 5'11". But as they get older, they grow. And so by the time they live much longer than humans. I believe they live as long as 700 years. I believe that they live approximately 10 times as long as humans do. And later in their life, they begin growing again. And so when you see a really old one, some of the really old ones may easily be 7 or 8 feet tall. The reason they eventually die is not because of old age like humans get old. It's because their bones and muscles, they get so tall that their internal organs can no longer support their bones and muscles. And so as they get taller and older, they become more fragile. And so by the time they're like 7.5 or 8 feet tall, it's rare to see one that tall all by himself. Those are almost always seen with younger members with them. The other aliens look so much like people from Norway that if you didn't know the difference, you could never tell them apart. I saw them, as described in Book 3, in Madison, Wisconsin, in the wintertime. What I call the Norwegian aliens. The only way you could tell them apart from ordinary humans is that they had 24 teeth instead of 32 teeth like humans do, and the roots in their teeth are not as long as human roots, and so and as you know, humans are limited. Humans have only 2 sets of teeth, baby teeth and adult teeth, but they routinely replace their teeth. Like every 5 years, a new tooth grows in, and the roots on their teeth are much shorter than on human roots, and and their teeth are noticeably wider than human teeth. But otherwise, if you see them like in the wintertime, you really can't tell the difference. If you see them like out on the beach, and I only saw one guy out on the beach one time. It was in November, and they can take the cold better than we can. They have slightly webbed feet, and they speak with a noticeable European accent. But if you didn't suspect it, you would never guess it. The two that I was talking to briefly, which was a young man and a young woman, they have a much calmer demeanor than a human. And so the only way you could ever spot them, the only way you'd even suspect it is that they would just have that unusual calm. They were plant eaters. They ate. All they would ever eat is plants. They wouldn't eat any dairy products or any meat or anything. The food that I saw on board the scout craft looked like mushroom pudding. They had prepared it themselves, but it looked like mushroom pudding. Some of my friends said that they saw them gathering like plants and flowers up on the mountains one day. They just liked. I don't know very much about the precise details of what they ate, but I'm certain that it was only plants. The tall whites do not have teeth like we do. They have ridges, but they don't have teeth that come out like we do. They just have ridges. Their skin was just as white as an ordinary piece of paper. They only have about half as much hair as humans, and so like Like on my arm, I have a lot of, like all humans, I have a lot of hair. But when you saw like their men on their arm, there was only like half as much hair. The hair in their head is much thinner. They have only about half as much hair as humans. And their hair is almost transparent. It's so white, and it's much thinner than human hair. But they look like platinum blonde. Their eyes are noticeably larger than humans. They're almost, I estimated their eyes to be typically twice as large as humans, and they stretch further around the sides of their head than human eyes do. But when they're young, it's not as noticeable as you might think. They're young women, for example. They're women who are equivalent to, say, human women who are like 19, 20, 21, with very little trouble can put on makeup and a wig and dress up to look human, so that if you didn't suspect it, you wouldn't notice it. However, this extra lifespan isn't always good, because it means that when their body goes to repair itself, it also runs slower than for humans. So like if they were to scratch themselves, it would take their skin like 10 times longer to heal than it does ours. If you were talking with them, it was common for, for them to remark about how quickly humans healed. That was common for them to remark. They were so intelligent that each one had his own individual personality, just like humans. And their natural language, if they were just talking among themselves using their natural language, it sounded like a series of dog barking or coyote yelping or humming meadowlark sounds. If they were happy, it especially sounded like dogs barking. If they wanted to talk to each other a long distance away, it sometimes sounded like a horse whinnying. And I remember one night when I was out there, and it was in 1965, I remember hearing I didn't realize that aliens were out there, but I remember hearing the sound of a horse whinnying coming from behind the Range 3 lounge, carrying out over the desert. It was a very beautiful sound, like a horse whinnying. And I remember thinking, gee, I didn't know there were wild horses out here. And then I was very cautiously looking around. I had a flashlight and stuff, and I couldn't find anything. And then later I could hear like 2 more whinnies coming from down the valley. They had to teach themselves to speak English. And so it was very common, say if a group of 4 or 5 of them came around, for there to be only one that actually spoke English, and for the others to just stand there and not actually say anything, because they didn't really want to scare you when they came around to where I was. But typically they did not want to scare me, so between themselves they wouldn't use their natural language when they were up close to me. They would when they were out by themselves out in the desert. When they were using their meadowlark sounds, it was very common to go out there at night, like on the morning run, and it would sound like there were 4 or 5 meadowlarks out in the sagebrush. Although I myself actually never saw a real meadowlark when I was out there, you'd hear them all the time. They didn't say this, but I estimated that their planet operated on a 90 or a 96-hour day. And so what would happen is, let's say like if you started the cycle and you were out there at 4 in the morning and they came around, they would be wide awake and well rested, like they'd just gotten up. And then the next morning when they came out, they would be, when you went out there, those same people, when they were out there, they would look noticeably tired, the way humans do, say like after a hard day of work or late in the afternoon. But then, so they would be active for 2 days, but then 2 days would go by and you wouldn't see them, or you wouldn't see those individuals because they were sleeping. And when they got tired, they couldn't put it off the way a human does. You know how a human you can be driving a car saying you'd be tired, and then you take a coffee, and you might put it off for 18, 20 hours, for a very long time, like, before finally stopping to rest. When they got tired, they didn't have much more than 15 minutes warning, and then they simply collapsed. And so they were very conscious of that sleep-waking cycle, far more than humans were, because they really couldn't put it off when they got tired. And this was especially true for the kids. So like one night when they were out there in an incident not described in my book, one of the kids got tired, and they had to physically carry him back to the scout craft. It was one of the first times that I saw him bring the scout craft in close to pick him up. Well, there's a difference in how they walk, but their body structure, their body structure is slightly different than humans because they're much thinner. Based on the depths of footprints, One time I measured the depths of footprints for one of their guards, and he was the same height I am, and I estimated that he only weighed between 90 and 110 pounds, because their bones are real frail and they're real thin. They look like skinny basketball players, at least the young adults do. And their fingers are different. Their fingers are longer in proportion to their hand, and their thumbs are way shorter. And many times when they come around, it would look like they didn't have thumbs. Because their arms and stuff are thinner, they don't have like big graspy grabbing hands like we do. I believe that the claws were probably artificial, because probably something that they were wearing for defense. Because like one night, as described in my book, the teacher who's described in my book was standing watching the children play, and she had her hands like this on both shoulders, and she was clearly wearing 2-inch long claws at that time that looked like fingernails or claws. They didn't look like aluminum or steel. They looked probably nylon or plastic. But on the other hand, another time when I saw her in Las Vegas, Nevada, disguised as a human, on that evening she was wearing gloves but wasn't wearing claws. And so from that I conclude that the claws were probably artificial. Remember, when they came around, I was especially at first, I was very terrified, and even after I got used to them coming around, as described in my book, you never really, at least I was, never really able to just sit down and relax around them the way you might sit down and relax around a human, because they're not human and they're always well armed. You know, you're always thinking in terms of your own defense. Their nervous system was, I estimated, was 2.5 to 3 times faster than humans. If they panicked or whatever, they could move like 2.5 or 3 times faster than a human could. And when they walked, because their skeleton was slightly different and their weight was slightly different, they walk differently than a human does. When a human walks, when you bring your knee your knee comes forward first, and the foot trails, and then you spring forward, and then your foot comes forward. And so a human, when they're walking, is always like, you know, just inches away from falling down. But a human is like sprinting across, because there's a lot of, the way the lower foot works is fine. But when they walk, it's not that way. It's more like they're walking on, especially when they first arrive on Earth, and they're not necessarily used to the Earth's gravity. It's more like they're walking on lily pads. It's more like they're picking up their foot, and it doesn't trail, just bringing them across and setting down like you would on a lily pad. And especially when they're new to the Earth and they're just getting used to the Earth's gravity. And one of the reasons that you might see that it was common to see them out in the desert is because many new arrivals physically had to go out and walk around to get used to the Earth's gravity, walk around the desert and so on. And so that when they were out both exercising and enjoying the night and enjoying the stars, but they were also getting used to the Earth's gravity. That was a common reason to see them out walking around. Once you got used to spotting the differences, if you saw them walking quickly after they had been here for a while, it frequently looked like they were shuffling their feet. They could run like almost 30. The women could run typically the young women could run 30 miles an hour, and the men could run 35 miles an hour, much faster than a human could run, as described in my book. So even though it looked like they were typically looked like they might be shuffling their feet, they were capable of great speed. They had a suit, I'm going to say a spacesuit, which permitted them to float. And the suit came with a helmet, and there was some variation between helmets. There was the full helmet that sometimes you saw them in. Usually there was the half helmet that looked like the helmet a motorcycle rider might wear. But the suit, well, it was a continuous suit that looked like it was made out of aluminized canvas or aluminized nylon. And it had underneath, inside the suit, there were obviously there was more cords and stuff to it, fiber optic type things. And but when they turned on the suit gave them, it put out a zone of radioactive particles, and it allowed them to float, and it allowed them to levitate. They had to balance themselves when they did so. And sometimes, like when the children and at night, they usually wore the suit. It was rare to see them at night when they weren't wearing the suits. Although in the daytime, they apparently found the suit to be uncomfortable, The battery power for the suit appeared to only, I estimated, if they came out like at 12:30 at night, the suit would be running out of power by 6:30 in the morning. The suit could be operated, it could either be turned off or operated at several power levels, but when it was running full power, what it did is it put out a zone of fluorescent. All around the suit, there was a zone of fluorescent light and a force field. And I speak from direct experience, if you tried throwing a rock at them when they were wearing the suit and it was turned on, the rock would never get to them. The rock would get into that field, and then it would start slowing down like it was moving in molasses and just fall to the ground. Or the way a steel ball behaves if you throw it into a strong magnetic field. I understood that it would stop bullets. I never tried shooting at any of them. I know it stopped rocks, ordinary rocks, as hard as I could throw them. It's my understanding that it would stop a bullet. I never saw one stop a bullet, but it's my understanding that it would. One of their weapons was, it came in different sizes, but it looked like a white pencil. It was usually round, although sometimes it was square. And what it what it would do is it would put out microwaves, and only not just like it could be set to put out different kinds of microwaves. If it put out the complex pattern, if they wanted, they could point it at you and hypnotize you with it. So you could be standing there and they could pull out this weapon, point it at you. It worked best if they could get a clean shot at your temple. So they didn't like to be standing directly in front of you when they did it. They greatly preferred to be standing off to the side and get a clean shot at either one of your temples. And what it would do is it would hypnotize you. And what you were is hypnotized the same way as if say a magician were to hypnotise you in a show. One of the ways they were more advanced than humans was in what they were doing with ordinary radio waves and ordinary microwaves, both in terms of hypnotizing you, and also they had another weapon that was tuned to the frequency of sodium atoms, and the nerves have sodium atoms in them and calcium atoms in them. And if they wanted to give you an electric shock to make you back off, they could take it out and adjust it, which was just touching a couple buttons, adjust it to the frequency of sodium atoms, and then, point it at you and go zappo, and you'd feel like you got 100,000 volts, AC wrapping through your body. They never did it to me, but I met at least, there's no question they could do it, and I met at least 2 people who were terrified of them, who said that they had done it to them. That was one area where their technology, another area where their technology was in advance of us. Between themselves, they were very social, and they had division of labor. When they came as a group, for example, as described in Book 2, on the day that their scout craft overheated and set down in the desert, it was very similar to what you'd have if Air Force helicopters set down and you had repair crews come out. You had some guys that were specialists that were mechanics, and other guys that were other individuals that were teachers, and some were just mothers raising children, and you had their division of labor was surprisingly the same as what you'd see among humans, and their names reflected that. So the lady was called herself the teacher, and she was proud of her teaching ability. One on the scout craft, the co-pilot on the scout craft, who was also the flight mechanic, the name that he was known by was co-pilot, but he would have preferred to have been known by the name the mechanic, because he was very proud of his ability to repair the spacecraft as the scout craft. But apparently that name was taken in their hierarchy, and so when he came, I used to compliment him by saying, well, I see you're the mechanic, and that's what he really liked to be called, was the mechanic. One night I asked the teacher what her real name was, and she said I wouldn't be able to pronounce it because it sounded like a series of dog barks and meadowlark sounds. But that the names that they were using, the teacher, the mechanic, Range 4 Harry, co-pilot, the school bus driver, tour guide, and so on, were just names that they had assumed. She called names to make it easy for us to address them. And so you could go up to Range 4 Harry and you could say, what are you called? And he would say, you may call me Range 4 Harry. Remember that, as the weather observer, I would see them out in the desert, and both night and day, and that's what they were doing, was leisure time or spare time. The teacher was typically out playing with the children, and you could see her from time to time with different groups of children. When she came in close, she was usually with just 3 children, her daughter and a little girl, and 2 boys. Some days you'd see her further out in the desert where she'd be in charge of a class of perhaps 15 or 20 tall white children equivalent to like 8th graders or 7th graders. They were very similar to humans. When they came around, it was very common for them to point out their family relationships. It was one of the most common things in the world would be say like for a small group of them to come around, and then if you said good evening to one of them, for them to identify, for them to say, well, good evening, Charlie. The guard in the tower is my first cousin. The guard behind the Range 3 lounge is my younger brother. It was especially common for the women to do that. The women were far more willing to communicate than the men. They were similar to humans in that they were more willing to be open and talk with you. But remember, they never came around just to talk to me. They always came around for some other reason. Well, they were very social among themselves, and so they would have had to have been community-oriented. But they didn't, I never saw them fight or argue between themselves the way humans would. I'm not saying they had a perfect society. Maybe it's just because they understood there were so few of them, 200 or 300 on this planet, and lots of humans. Maybe it was just because of their, because of their location. They never arm wrestled or fought or got into visible arguments or animated arguments. For as far as their social structure went, they clearly had generals and they clearly had a council and so on. And so there was a very noticeable structure to what they were doing. They're all individually unique, and they also are different from humans in several ways. The first way was they handled anger differently than humans. 2 young men, like when I was young and in the Air Force, me and my friends when we were young, we might go out and beat each other up or, hit each other in the shoulder or wrestle and for a little while be angry at each other and scream and shout and then end up the best of friends. The tall whites aren't like that at all. If you ever went out and tried to arm wrestle or tried to push and shove or anything like that, they'd just kill you or something very close to it. If you even slapped one on the back the way you would, say, a young man might slap his friends on the back and say, how's that? If you slapped one of them on the back, you might break half of the bones in their body and they would never recover. Tall white mothers were different also. When the tall white mothers would come around, they were very proud of the fact that they loved their children, and they were like female gorillas. When they came around with their children, the most common way for the tall white mothers to begin a conversation would be to say, you know that we love our children more than human mothers love their children. And if you were going to start talking to a tall white mother, at least in my case, the simplest way to start the conversation, to get the conversation off on the right foot, would be to say, I know that you love your children more than human mothers love their children, as a way of getting the conversation off on the right foot. I found that as time went on, being around them was very stressful for me, because as a human, I have a natural tendency to think of them as human and treat them like they're human, and they're really not. And because they can get angry 2 to 3 times faster than a human and pull their weapons and administer justice before the human, in my case, can really do, as described in Book 3, can really do much more than tighten a few muscles and say, oops, something's coming. I found that one of the points of stress was that I had to continually remind myself, remember, they're not human. Remember, like, for example, humans naturally walk up to each other and shake hands. They never want to be touched by a human. They never want you to reach out your hand and offer to touch them. When they come around, what they want you to do is to stand more or less perfectly still, especially with your feet, as well as your hands, and let them walk up to you. And when they start to walk away, they never, never, never want you to follow. And see, one of the first agreements I had with them was that when I started to walk away, they would not follow, and when they started to walk away, I would not follow.
In this world, I'm an alien. to your hat, folks. Yes, we're about to take off for part 2 of Charlie Hall and his stories about the tall white aliens. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee because this is a long show. That's why we broke it up into 2 parts, okay? So hang in there. The exciting bits are really yet to come, and I'm glad you stayed tuned for this second part, okay? So Sweeps Fox Sane, please enjoy the rest of this, and a big cheers to Charlie Hall and his tall white aliens. See you down the road, part 2.
Their feeling was if they never got in my way, if their feeling was that if I could always go wherever I wanted, anytime I wanted, and if they never got in my way, then why should I care where they are, what they're doing? And they meant it. I mean, they, you know, as described in my books, if I were in the shower, they really might come into the barracks and look in my locker. They might not. Usually they wouldn't touch anything, but like if I was out there at my theodolite, and the kids loved to come and look through the theodolite and see what the balloon looked like. One night when the teacher was there and the kids were playing, they're very curious. They're way more curious of things than we are. They don't have any contact sports like football or baseball, and so it's no surprise that they would have better equipment and better electronics, because that's like one of their big things. And one night when the teacher was standing there, and she was looking at the stars, and she was just having a good time, you know, and watching the children play, similar to the way mothers the world over take the children to the park. And after I finished my readings, and I wanted to let the kids look through my theodolite if they wished to, usually they did, but sometimes they didn't. And so I went over there, and I asked her a few questions, which she answered. And she was just in a pleasant mood. And I asked her how life on Earth compared, how humans on Earth compared with intelligent life on other planets that she had seen. And she said that one of the things that they found really surprising was the willingness that humans have to play with animals. And she said that's really unusual. She said that the Earth was the only place they knew of where the intelligent people were willing to do that. She said that on most planets what happened was that once the intelligent people evolved, they went and killed off all the animals and really didn't care how they thought. Really no desire for pet. As plant eaters, they had absolutely no desire to have pet dogs, pet cats, pet animals. When the tall whites came around, they never came with pets or with animal fur or anything that related to animals. Even here on Earth, dogs, they had no desire to even have like dogs as pets or anything. Their intentions were very obvious. Space is a big place. The sun occurs in the middle of a giant bubble of emptiness. And across that giant bubble of emptiness, there's a few stars that form stepping stones, like islands in the openness. The nearest star to the sun, Alpha Centauri and Proxima Centauri, those are almost 4 light years away. But usually stars are a lot closer. Most stars have another star within 2 or 3 light months. And so from the point of view of the tall whites, if they're traveling from one side of this big bubble of emptiness to another, they need places where they can stop and repair their ships and refuel and have a base where they can do that as part of the island hopping thing. The same way that the U.S. Navy has Navy bases on various islands in the Pacific, so that if a ship needs to be repaired or supplied, it can put in there. And that's what they were doing. And so when they were here, they weren't here on an agenda to conquer the Earth or to save the Earth or to educate the Earth or to do anything with the Earth. If, from their point of view, they'd be just as happy if Earthmen never came around, if they'd just leave them on the base, you know. They never talked about religion or philosophy. The only times that ever came up was, on the one hand, they clearly practiced tit for tat. If you hurt them, they'll hurt you back. But if you're nice to them, they'll be nice back. And they start out by being nice to you. And if you become angry with them, they'll just go away if you haven't hurt them or frightened the children. They clearly understood that what I call the concept of brotherly love, of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you could clearly sit down and talk with them saying, I haven't hurt you, I haven't caused you any pain, are you going to cause me any pain? And you could clearly discuss brotherly love and tit for tat. And in book 2, when I was up in there in the hangar, in the Scoutcraft hangar on their main base, when the teacher was explaining to the other tall whites, she was speaking English, as described in book 2, she was saying about me, she was saying, he believes in God. And therefore the concept of God was clearly one that they were aware of. But I don't know anything beyond I don't know anything beyond that. I don't know. When they came around, they did not come around to talk to me, per se. They came around with some other mission, like for their kids to play, or for the new people to see what an Earthman was like, or for the people engaged in technology transfer to practice talking to a human before talking to the generals, or for some other reason, but they never came around to just sit and talk about life or love or the pursuit of happiness. Well, to begin with, when the women would dress up, and the men too, when they would dress up and disguise themselves as humans, and when you'd see them in Las Vegas, there was a place up in their forehead, just below their hairline, that they would never put makeup over, where you could actually see their skin. And I don't know why. I suppose it's because they had an embedded chip or something up in there. But because they were otherwise so similar to humans, I don't know anything about their internal physiology. I'm not even a doctor. But, as far as their brain goes, I could believe that their brain was structured similar to ours, with the left half and the right half, and that was an embedded chip. In terms, I can only guess, because they never discussed that with me. And I just note that was a feature. Usually the women were quite emotional and quite happy to talk about things like pretty dresses and fashions. They were quite willing they have a very dry sense of humor. And they were quite willing to make dry jokes about the American generals. For example, this is the teacher one time said, we were talking about the commissary that they had up on their mountain base, and as a dry joke, she was saying all the clothes were picked by the American generals, who are naturally old men, so there's naturally no selection for beautiful dresses, and that's one of the reasons why they wanted to go into town and shop, so they get pretty clothes and for themselves and their kids. And then you had others like the mechanic, who was so proud of his mechanical ability. He was a nice guy, but he wasn't the kind of guy that you would say. He was like a car mechanic. He was the kind of guy where you could sit down and talk about nuts and bolts of a spacecraft, and he'd go on for, and he would get all excited. But if you wanted to talk about something like, how happy it is that Christmas is coming or something, well, that bored him. If anyone tells me that there's a base where the Air Force and the aliens share, or where the Air Force maintains the boundary and the aliens have their base, then my feeling is the Air Force, speaking purely personal for myself, my feeling is that the Air Force would never agree to it unless the aliens you found in that base were very much like the Air Force, you see? And the vice versa, that if the aliens came here and they weren't like the guys in the U.S. Air Force, then the Air Force would be reluctant to agree to that. The example I give is that here in New Mexico at Holloman Air Force Base, you can walk around and find German pilots of the German Air Force training on base. Right. And of course, that's because the Germans, the Americans, well, we're the same guys, But on the other hand, when you walk around that base, you do not find pilots from the Red Chinese Air Force training, because there are differences between us and the Red Chinese, you see. So it didn't surprise me that you'd be walking around a place like Indian Springs and find aliens who were so much like us that it was shocking. When I talked about them with my friends, to a man, me and my friends all had a common feeling. It was that we were shocked at how much like us they were. Because, like one of my friends was saying, that he had always expected aliens to be radically different, to be robots or something. And he said that he was shocked to find that they thought just like we did, that they understood what we, the tremendous similarities. Even so, remember that they weren't human. they were not telepathic. What they had was very good electronics. And if you saw them out there and they weren't wearing their communication equipment, if they were just out there wearing their like on a hot day in the summertime, where they would just be wearing like their nylon boots and their nylon jumpsuits, and which all were white or aluminum white, not glinting in the sun, then in order to communicate, they had to use their language the same way we do. However, because they knew more about electronics and about microwaves and stuff, what they had was an electronic communication system. And if they were wearing it, for example, if they were wearing a helmet where this equipment was typically found typically they might be wearing a small helmet, and the equipment would fit in the helmet and would fit over their temples. And if they were a little ways away from you, say like 20 feet, and they could get a clean line of sight, it was line of sight communication only. If they could get a clean line of sight to one of your temples, then what they could do is they could tell what you were thinking, and they could place thoughts in your mind. But it only worked if you were calm. It only worked if you were standing there without moving your hands or especially your feet. If you were moving your hands or your feet, they would put static into the system, and they didn't know what was. It only worked if you were also relaxed and calm. If you became angry or panicky or hysterical or anything, or if you were injured or tired, then it didn't work. Then it went. Then they couldn't tell what you were thinking. And it had a limited range. The furthest away I ever saw them use it was 1.25 miles. Usually they liked to come in somewhere between 20 feet and 50 feet where it worked the best. If they came in too close, it didn't work either. It got static. If there were several of them using the equipment, the communications equipment, and they were in close and the equipment was turned up high, it would make it almost impossible for a person to concentrate on his own thoughts. The tour guide was an advocate. He used to go around to the others, and he used to advocate, he wanted them to adjust their equipment very commonly to listen only and to not transmit. And then just once in a while, the tour guide would transmit at a very low volume level. And that allowed, when he was doing that, you could just be relaxed and normal. But if they turned up the equipment high or, really high, and they were in close, it was like standing in front of a stereo. They could just blast you so you could hardly even think at all. Now, what they would do with their electronic, another variation of their electronic equipment, is they could hypnotize you. And you'd be hypnotized, as described in Book 2, the same way as if you were, say, hypnotized by a magician. And you might only be lightly hypnotized, or you might be heavily hypnotized, depending on how they felt like doing it. Well, of course, when you're hypnotized, you don't have any sensation of the passage of time. And when they hit you with the beam, it could hit you so fast that you didn't know it was coming. So like one time when I was walking, as described in my books, from my theodolite stand to my weather shack, I can't remember taking step 13. It was like 19 or 20 steps. And I remember taking step 12, and somewhere between taking step 12 and 14, more than 20 minutes passed, because I was hypnotized in that time. See? And one time, as described in my books, I asked the teacher, "Where do you come from?" And they loved to reason me into a corner. Apparently it was quite easy for them to do. And she said to me, "Do you know the names we use when we talk about the stars?" And I said, "No." And she said, "So if we told you, you still wouldn't know where we came from." And and they were all laughing, they thought that was really funny, and I said, "Well, no." And she said, "So why do you want us to tell you why do you want to know where we come from? You still won't know, right?" And then they were all laughing, because for them that was like a big joke. We all thought Charlie again. But however, one night when there was a group of them standing around me, I referred to the star Arcturus, which is 36 light years away, and they all flinched. They all became really nervous. And I don't know if they're from Arcturus, but I do feel certain that they had all been to Arcturus. So the teacher clearly wanted her little girl to have other playmates. And so, as described in Book 1, the teacher, the little girl in town, the teacher would clearly come with the children and her little girl, and play with the human little girl at night. And I'm certain they did that because one night I was up late and I actually saw them. And the little girl lived on the southeast side of Indian Springs, and I actually saw them come out of the mountains. And I can only speculate, because when I left Nellis, and I don't have any personal knowledge after that. However, over the years, I have met people who've come to me with stories, if not aware of my previous experience, of having met or encountered the very same kinds of creatures, tall white creatures, in tunnels and caves, in some mines in Illinois and so on. And the base that they had out there, somebody had poured an awful lot of concrete on the hangar entrance. And so, there was no reason, there would be no reason whatever for them to move. Although the teacher one time when we were, as described in book 3, when talking about the alien woman described in book 3 who used the name Pamela, said that she had been born in that valley when James Madison was president. And that's the only, and I note that the ancient Greeks named the star Arcturus the Watcher Star. And if you go back far enough in ancient Greek mythology, back like in 950, 970 BC, if you go back far enough, when the Greeks learned to write, I guess, in 972 BC, if you go back far enough, you'll find that in ancient Greek mythology, the ancient Greek men used to say back then, I understand, it's my understanding from the books I've read and stuff, that the men of ancient Greece used to believe that a group of tall white gods came to Earth from the star Arcturus, and that when they were camping out in the mountains of Greece on summer nights, that it was common for these gods to come and stand out in the woods and watch them, and just watch everything they were doing. And that's why the ancient Greeks, I understand from my reading, from the books I've read, it's my understanding that that's why the ancient Greeks originally called the star Arcturus the Watcher Star. They had two kinds of craft, two general types of craft. They had the scout craft that were about the size of a mountain diesel with a double trailer, and it was smooth and rounded. And the scout craft was clearly a small craft that was just meant to fly around here on the Earth and maybe to the moon and back. But as described in my books, the scout craft was something they built here and used here and kept here. They had and the scout craft was white, and they had the deep spacecraft. The deep spacecraft were black with a titanium, what appeared to be a titanium black hull. It was ellipsoidal, and it had like rows of windows along the sides, and in the front it had windows, and it also had a clearly defined cockpit where the pilot and the co-pilot would sit while piloting the craft. And it had several floors, and they came in 3 different sizes. The largest size I estimated from looking at the hangar entrance. The hangar was like 90 feet tall and somewhere between 350 and 500 feet wide, and it had doors that opened, concrete doors that opened in sections. And the largest of the deep spacecraft could just barely fit in there. Now, the hangar went way back in there. The hangar was much deeper than its opening. So the craft was like about twice as long as it was high. So the largest of the deep spacecraft, when it went in there, it probably didn't have 3 feet of clearance on any side. And the back of the craft was obviously where the power plant and stuff were. There were no windows in the back. And then the smallest of the deep spacecraft were about half that size. So the smaller deep spacecraft, only half of the hangar doors would have to open. And then there was a size in between where most of the hangar doors would open. And then the deep spacecraft would arrive on schedule. If you were powering a gravity-powered craft and you were coming to the Earth from another solar system, then you were a new pilot, you would want very, very much to land at sundown on the night of the full moon. Because at sundown on the night of the full moon, the hangar where you're going to land at is exactly on the trailing edge of the Earth. The Earth is going away from you. And on the full moon, the sun will be on your left with north up, and the moon will be on your right. And so you're going to be coming into a smooth a place that's very smooth gravitationally and landing on the Earth, much like a fighter airplane lands on an aircraft carrier. On the deep spacecraft, on the titanium craft, the few times that I saw them close up, most of the time I saw them only in the distance, but the few times I saw them close up, there was only tall whites on the deep spacecraft. Now, on the scout craft, it was anything goes, because the scout craft were just short-range craft coming down from the base. And it wasn't at all unusual to see the American generals and the tall whites together on the scout craft, or to get off the scout craft, or to go on. Usually, if you saw a human on a scout craft, it was a general or a government official or someone important. Well, I'd like to point out a difference between humans and aliens getting on board the scout craft and, say, going to the moon or Mars, as opposed to humans and aliens getting on the deep spacecraft and going to another planet, or going to another star. I can only speculate on because I never saw any humans on board the deep spacecraft, the few that I saw close up. But I note that from the point of view of the scout craft, that when the moon is in the fourth quarter, and it's just after dawn, the moon is directly above you, moving towards the west. And I note that if you have a high-performance gravity-powered spacecraft, any kid can take that craft to the moon for 2 or 3 hours and return if the craft has a high enough performance, if it's high enough performance. And all they have to do is just look up and aim to the west of the moon and just visually hit the gas, hit the power. They don't have to have a big computer program. And if the craft can accelerate really fast, as the ones described in my book, then you would be in front of the moon, but you wouldn't be heading right at the moon. You'd be heading towards space in front of the moon as it's coming towards you. And that means that you don't have to be real precise. You just got to be in the ballpark. And so that means that when the craft goes past the moon and the moon's coming this way, if you cut back on the power, the craft will naturally travel around behind the moon, giving you a nice, happy day, let's land and see it kind of place. And then as you come around on the front side of the moon is still traveling that way. And if you return before it's noon on Earth at the place where you took off, coming back is really peanuts, because now when you're on the moon and you're looking straight up, the Earth is directly above you and moving to its left. So now if you aim just to the right, just above the Earth, it's moving this way. All you got to do is be in the ballpark. When you're directly above it, you just slow down and then let the Earth bring you back in, right to where you took off from. And I used to see scout craft doing that. On at least on several occasions, 6 or 7 different occasions, I used to see the scout craft doing that, and there were generals on board at the time. It wasn't until after the accident where my friend got burned so bad that the generals sat down with the aliens and formed a committee and decided that they would pick just one guy, and that whatever happened to him was just whatever happened to him. So when I was out there, the rule was that I had to be totally alone, even if I'm just sitting in my weather shack writing letters home and painting by number or reading books. Whatever it was, I had to be totally alone, and whatever it was, I could never be ordered off the ranges. And that was a committee vote. That wasn't like one general or a group of people. That was a vote, that was an agreement they made with the aliens. And it made sense, because remember, lots of times, probably half of the times, what was happening was the alien, the teacher, was bringing children around whose only function it was to play and have fun. If that were classified, that would have upset the alien teacher something terrible, because it would have meant that if that were classified, that would have meant that every time she brought the kids around just to play and have fun in the park, that I would have to, I would have had to go into Nellis and be debriefed and tell some general how she was treating her daughter, and wondering, and cross-examining how she was, disciplining the kids and so on. That would have made her as angry that would have just totally upset her. And see, from the point of view of the generals, they didn't want to upset the aliens. So it wasn't because I was special. It was because the alien teacher wanted a playground for her kids. And they wanted a test human to practice on. And that's why the generals picked me. And therefore, that's why nothing I did was ever classified. Well, to begin with, remember, I don't have any photographs. I don't have any sketches. I don't have any souvenirs. The milk bottle that was laid out in the sun and was so beautifully purple marked Tonopah Dairy 1908. I left on the ranges where I found it. I didn't take any notes with me off the range. Everything I do is from memory. So to begin with, from the point of view of people who would care, well, you know, it's not like I'm walking around with any diagrams or testing information or anything. And remember, from the point of view of the aliens and the generals, the point of the project was not to teach me anything. It wasn't to show me how their craft worked or to show me any advanced technology or anything. The point of the project was the kids were bored and the women needed somebody to talk about clothing. And not classified items. The stuff that we would talk about were literally things out of the Sears catalog on the wall and the Montgomery Ward catalog. I used to have catalogs in my weather station because Range 3 had an outdoor outhouse, and if the paper got wet, you needed the catalog for several reasons. And sometimes you would see the aliens in the daytime wearing clothes like that were, I'm certain, were purchased right out of the catalog, and that's not classified. There's a couple more points. One is, I've been unemployed for 1.5 years, and so if you're listening, offer me a good job. I'm a great scientist, all right? And secondly, check my appendix in book 3, because you'll see that I know more physics than the silly guys who are doing it, so I should be given a nice job with a big pay, okay? From the point of view of the military, in book 2, I described talking to one of my friends who was there with me in the Springs, at Indian Springs. And I remember sitting down, and he knew they were real. He had seen them himself out in the ranges. He had been out there himself, and he was terrified of them, and he knew that they were real. And I was talking to him, and I was trying to explain to him one of the conversations I'd had with the teacher, where she was wondering about the price of clothes in the women's clothing stores in Las Vegas, and if there was an easy one that I thought they could, shop at, and so on, just like any woman would want to take a shopping trip into town. And he was my friend, and he knew they were real. And the way he looked at me, he really didn't believe me. He thought I was nuts. And the two of us were out there together. And so from the point of view of the military, why bother, I mean, what would be the point of it, you see? I have a master's degree in physics, by just thinking about famous experiments in physics the way I think the physicists should be thinking about them. For example, they should start with the famous experiment known as the water-filled telescope, and then go to the Michelson-Morley experiment and see that what's in the Michelson-Morley experiment is just a variation of the water-filled telescope, and therefore the fundamental underpinnings of relativity are not correct because the relativity doesn't explain the water-filled telescope. And it's described in technical detail in my book. I think they should go to the experiment that's done in freshman physics classes at college called the toroidal sphere, which shows, as described in my book, that when you build a toroidal sphere with an electric circuit, a donut-shaped device, there's no electric field outside the toroid, and there's no electric field outside the toroid. But it shows that there is a field outside the toroid, a third field not generally recognized by physics that must be associated with electricity and magnetism, and therefore must be a component of light. And once you start from there, you'll see that if you know what you're doing, you can build a very fine spacecraft that goes very fast and goes zuma and exceeds the speed of light. And that's what I think they should be doing. They should be trying those kinds of experiments. And I think they should be taking subatomic particles, the easy ones that you could create, and building things with fiber optics, and building like the equivalent of electromagnets, only using fiber optics instead of using copper wire, and then using ordinary subatomic particles, or maybe light itself, to send down the fiber optics. Because in book 2, the craft that I saw sit down on the desert suffered a meltdown of its fiber optic windings. When they opened up the back of the craft, what you saw in there was miles and miles of melted fiber optics. Now, melted fiber optics, which melts at more or less 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, has a chemical composition that looks like the slag from an aluminum furnace. And when you go and you read Project Blue Book and what Alan J. Hynek says in there about some of the pieces of molten metal that he found around from sites where flying saucers had been, he says that what he found looked like the slag from a aluminum furnace. And see, I think that they're sending radioactive subatomic particles down these fiber optics, and because they're radioactive, they decay and heat the optics, heat the fibers. And I think the design works in the coldness of space, but on a hot day in the summertime, as described in Book 2, when the craft suddenly thinks where they sit down with the craft and the craft is still hot, and they're forced to power up and leave before the craft has had a chance to cool down, then those fiber optics will physically melt. That's why I think that what's running in those fiber optics is those radioactive subatomic particles. And if the government's monitoring me, we'll offer me a job and we'll go run some experiments and prove it. So I believe that Maxwell's 4 equations of electromagnetic motion, which date from 1864, need to be expanded to at least 6 to account for the workings of the third field. So I think that instead of having 4 equations, of Maxwell's equations instead of being 4, I think that they should be at least 6. And when I say that I have a third field, it must be like an electric field. It has both a positive and a negative part, and interacts with gravity, and therefore can either push or pull, and therefore there must be another particle, like the electron, or another charge, or another quark. There must be more to physics in that direction. And when you go in that direction, you'll see that the basic tenet of relativity, that you can't travel faster than light, is simply wrong, because the deep spacecraft that came on a schedule, they came on a schedule. They came, as every month on the full moon, something was landed. One month there was a medium-sized deep spacecraft and 2 small ones in that hangar. Another month there was a great big one, and then there was a very pronounced schedule to it. And that means that they must have set flight times, and when you look at the nearby universe, the nearest inhabitable places are light years away. And that means that those craft had to be making the rounds, like on schedule, traveling faster than the speed of light. You can go into any bookstore in the world and say, I'd like to buy Millennial Hospitality by Charles James Hall, and place an order, okay? They can buy them on Amazon.com. They can buy them through FirstBooks.com. As described in my book, when I first came across the tall whites, or more properly, they came across me, when I first encountered them out in the desert, because remember, I never went looking for them. I never went exploring. All I was trying to do was to go out to the ranges and take the weather report and phone them in. And when I first encountered them, the first result was just abject terror, as described in my book. When my friends had come to me beforehand and said they're out there, I had laughed until I could hardly walk, because it seemed so ridiculous. And when I first came across them, it was just a soul-shaking terror. And then for months, I would have rather believed that I was nuts, or that I was suffering from some kind of blood flow problem in the brain, or some form of denial. I had a CIA psychiatrist one time tell me that I had more mental defenses than he thought it was possible for any human to ever have. And the thing that he found shocking about me was that I could use all of them interchangeably at the drop of a hat. And which probably explains the only reason that I was able to survive. But I went through it. It took me at least 6 months to get over the terror and to get over the denial of saying, well, I know it looks that way, but that can't be right. Or, as described in my books, there were so many nights I was sitting there saying to myself, so this is what insanity is like. It's quite painless, you know. And as described in my books, it took me months to get to where I could just accept the fact that they were real, they were intelligent, and they were here. It took me months to get to where I could just accept the fact that they were real, and in order to do that, I had to rethink everything. The teacher herself one night was teasing me months later, I was saying I thought we were alone in the universe, and she was teasing me. She was saying, you can see all the stars in the sky. Surely you didn't think you were alone. And I didn't know what to say because I had, you know. And then she was saying that on their planet that the atmosphere was thicker, and that you couldn't see. They couldn't see the stars from when they were on the ground, and that they didn't know there was that there was other stars and heavens and stuff like that, until their scientists had learned to build craft that would fly above their atmosphere. And she said when they did, they had this big surprise when they first saw the heavens. And that's why she and her friends, that's why when I was out in the valley, why lots of nights they loved to just hike around and look at the stars in the sky. Thank you.
I'm the nigger.